He pointed a loaded gun at my son on our front lawn in broad daylight, over a bird feeder. And Karen? She stood right behind him, clutching her HOA clipboard, wearing that smug, lemon-sucking grin like it was part of her daily routine. You see, in our little subdivision of Red Maple Grove, where the grass height is regulated and your mailbox color has to be approved, we somehow ended up with a self-appointed HOA president who acted less like a neighbor and more like a dictator with a yardstick. And the man with the gun? That was her boyfriend, Randy, a part-time sheriff's deputy with a full-time ego and zero sense of boundaries. They thought they were in charge of this place, untouchable, until they picked a fight with the wrong veteran. What Karen didn't know was that my son wasn't just some quiet guy back from overseas. He's special forces trained, calm under pressure, and yes, legally armed. And what came next? Well, let's just say Red Maple Grove hasn't been the same since. I moved here for peace. For quiet. For cul-de-sacs, trimmed hedges, and monthly potlucks with overcooked casseroles and pies that all somehow tasted the same. My husband and I had just retired, and this neighborhood promised a calm place to sip coffee, feed the birds, and maybe even die in peace. But no one warned us about Karen. She started small, passive-aggressive notes about our flagpole being too tall under HOA Code 4.3, complaints that our garden gnome counted as non-compliant ornamentation. We laughed it off at first, thought maybe she was just bored. Or lonely. But boredom doesn't explain the fines that started piling up. $7 for a non-regulation mailbox handle, $200 for an unauthorized paint tone variation on the garage trim. She had power. She knew it. And she wielded it like a blunt object. Karen was the kind of woman who ran for HOA president unopposed, because no one else wanted the job, and then rewrote the rules so no one else could ever run. She chaired every meeting, controlled the voting procedures, and shut down any neighbor who dared question her. She wasn't a neighbor. She was a regime. Then she met Randy, her cop boyfriend. He wasn't officially part of the HOA, of course, but suddenly he was everywhere, patrolling the block in his cruiser, knocking on doors under the guise of code enforcement. Some neighbors liked the attention. Others started locking their gates. Then my son came home. Jason, quiet, keeps to himself, mows my lawn every Sunday, says ma'am, to everyone, even the cat. Karen didn't like him. Said he looked intimidating. Said his truck was oversized for community specs. Said our American flag was hostile imagery. We ignored her, until the fines started stacking up. Until Randy showed up on our lawn. That day, Jason was hanging a bird feeder from the old oak in the front yard. I was on the porch. Karen came marching up the sidewalk like she owned the pavement, Randy 2 steps behind her, mirrored sunglasses and badge on full display. She announced we were in violation of Code 6.8b, unauthorized wildlife attraction devices. Jason turned, birdseed still in his hand, and asked, "You serious?" That's when Randy reached for his holster, pulled his service weapon and pointed it, directly at my son. Jason didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just looked at the man with a calm so deep, so unnerving, it made my skin crawl. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind that says, you just made the biggest mistake of your HOA career. If pointing a gun at my son was the crescendo, let's rewind to the overture. Because like all great tragedies, this one started small. Petty complaints, a garden hose, and one very territorial hummingbird. Before Randy showed up with his weaponized ego and mirrored shades, Karen had already begun what I call her reign of mild tyranny. She took over the HOA board 2 years ago, naturally unopposed, because no one else wanted the job. That was our first mistake. At first, she did the usual HOA dance, newsletters, holiday banners, passive-aggressive reminders about garbage bins. But once she tasted power, it was like watching a suburban Napoleon rise to the throne. She rewrote bylaws like she was carving commandments into stone tablets. Red Maple Grove was your standard retirement cul-de-sac. Quiet, predictable, full of people who put up Christmas decorations on November 1st and wave politely while judging your lawn height from behind their blinds. Karen was perfect for it. She was also the kind of woman who wore a visor unironically, walked a schnauzer named Muffin, and printed out citations for ornamental disobedience. Yes, that was her actual phrasing when she fined the Johnsons for having a lawn gnome dressed like Elvis. The first time I knew we were in trouble was when she showed up at my door with a tape measure. "Just checking your mailbox," she said cheerfully. "It looks like it's half an inch too high." Unfortunately, code 3.44 says, I stopped listening. She fined us $50. A week later, it happened again, this time for unauthorized hose visibility. My green garden hose, left out while I was watering roses in 90-degree heat, had apparently disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Karen had decreed that hoses must be neutral tones only. That was strike 2. Strike 3 came when Jason returned from deployment. He'd served 4 tours, special forces, seen things no human should ever see, and yet, the thing that rattled him the most? HOA drama. When he parked his F-250 in our driveway, Karen pounced like a hawk spotting a mouse in an unapproved flower bed. "It's too wide," she said. "The tires exceed the parking boundary lines by 2 inches. And we don't allow vehicles that size overnight." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You mean the truck that's legally parked on my family's private property?" Karen smiled like someone who just discovered a loophole. "It's technically common property if the front tires cross the curb. We'll be issuing a $170 fine." Jason didn't say a word, just nodded. "Calm. Too calm." And that's when I started getting nervous. The cop, the clipboard, the random inspections. Then came Randy, part-time deputy, full-time walking lawsuit. Suddenly, random inspections became a thing. Randy and Karen walked the neighborhood together, armed with clipboards, cameras, and what I swear was a laminated HOA Bible. They knocked on doors, snapped photos, and cited people for everything from faded shutters to non-compliant porch cushions. Karen called it beautification enforcement. We called it suburban surveillance. Jason stayed quiet. But every night, I'd see him on his laptop, typing, watching, researching. Turns out HOA bylaws are public record. And Jason had a long memory and a much longer folder full of screenshots, dates, and every questionable decision Karen had ever made. The turning point? The bird feeder insurrection. Things escalated when Jason hung a bird feeder on our oak tree. It was his way of coping, quiet mornings, coffee in hand, just watching cardinals and blue jays flap around in peace. Karen hated it. "It's not HOA approved," she said. "Code 6.8b, no wildlife attracting devices." Jason pointed at 3 other houses with feeders. "You find them?" She grinned. "They're on the list." 3 days later, a $300 fine arrived in the mail. Jason didn't flinch, just said, "Okay." Which, in Jason speak, meant something was coming. And something did. Operation Pine Straw. Karen installed surveillance cameras on HOA property, aimed directly at our house. She claimed it was for community security, but they only pointed one way, at us. So we responded by planting pine straw all over the front yard. HOA legal, of course, Jason triple-checked. Karen accused us of landscape aggression. Then she held an emergency board meeting, chaired by her, with no one else present, and proposed a new rule: no natural mulch without prior approval. It passed, vote of 1. Jason appealed. She denied it. He appealed again. She fined us $500. That's when I found him in the garage, polishing a folder of documents thicker than a phone book. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just preparing," he said. Sometimes, the quiet guy in the room is just the one who hasn't spoken yet. The neighborhood was starting to crack. We weren't the only ones. The Johnsons got fined for unapproved window tinting. The Harts got a violation for flag placement proximity. Even poor Mrs. Lennox, who's 84 and blind in one eye, got written up for excessive bird bath algae. But people were afraid to speak out. Karen had manipulated proxy votes, rewritten meeting rules, and made herself president for life. She had Randy. She had the bylaws. She had a clipboard with more power than sense. But what she didn't have was Jason. And Jason? He had something better than a clipboard. He had training. He had patience. And he had evidence. Because while Karen was measuring grass blades with a ruler, Jason had been quietly gathering video documentation, collecting witness statements, everything by the book, all admissible, all ready for something she never saw coming. A formal federal complaint. But that's a story for another time. By the time summer rolled around, Red Maple Grove didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a Cold War. Neighbors spoke in whispers. Lawns were trimmed with military precision, not out of pride, but fear. You could practically feel Karen's clipboard breathing down your neck. And just when we thought she'd finally run out of rules to invent, she found a new target. Our dog. Now listen, Max is a 12-year-old golden retriever with arthritis and a pathological fear of squirrels. He wouldn't bite a biscuit without permission. But that didn't stop Karen from filing an animal aggression complaint because he barked once at a squirrel. Not at a child. Not at a neighbor. At a squirrel. She claimed it was a noise disruption in violation of Code 7.12. She issued us a $200 fine and said, "One more incident, and animal control will be notified." That was the last straw. That was the moment I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Jason clenched his jaw. Let me be clear, my son has been through things he doesn't talk about. He's been in villages where no one comes back whole. He's led missions that don't get written down, not in any official record. And yet, the only time I've ever seen his hands shake was when Karen threatened his dog. That night, he didn't sleep. He printed out every HOA code ever written, spread them across the kitchen table, and started highlighting. Not just the rules they'd broken, but every violation she'd ignored on her own property. Illegal pavers in her driveway. 2 trash bins instead of 1. A backyard shed with no permit. Then, he did something I'll never forget. He knocked on doors. The quiet one started speaking. Turns out Jason wasn't the only one keeping records. The Harts had audio of Randy making inappropriate comments during a compliance walk. The Johnsons had footage of Karen digging up their decorative plants, only to find them later for having dead landscaping. Even sweet Mrs. Lennox, 84 and half blind, had saved every citation she'd ever gotten, 27 in total, all suspiciously vague. Jason took it all, every photo, every recording, every crumpled notice, and compiled it into a 48-page dossier. Labeled, time-stamped, organized like a military briefing. Then he drove it to the county HOA regulatory office. Because here's the thing, when an HOA starts abusing its authority and multiple households come forward with documented proof, people start listening. Especially when one of those people is a decorated veteran with connections in federal oversight. Jason filed an official complaint citing abuse of power, conflict of interest, and possible civil rights violations.
And he wasn't done.
A week later, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. She didn't invite us, of course. But Jason showed up anyway. He wore his uniform, not to intimidate, not to threaten, but just to remind them who he was. Someone who had fought for the very freedoms Karen was trying to strangle with her laminated bylaw binder. He sat in the back row, silent, while Karen stood at the podium, ranting about non-compliant residents, subversive attitudes, and the need for tighter control. Then he raised his hand and asked one simple question. "Madam President, can you explain how HOA funds were used to pay for the surveillance cameras pointed exclusively at my family's home, without a community vote, without notice, and without a legal permit?" Karen blinked. Someone in the room gasped. Jason pulled out a printed bank record, page 6. HMA check number 4889, security equipment purchased using community funds. Installed without authorization. Karen stammered something about emergency powers, but the room had already shifted. The muttering started. Heads turned. Someone whispered, "She used our money for that." Jason leaned back. Didn't say another word. He didn't have to. Karen didn't take it well. The very next morning, Randy showed up again, this time with 2 other officers. They claimed they were responding to a community safety report. They marched onto our property, demanded Jason remove the flagpole we'd had up for 8 years, suddenly now considered a hazard. Jason refused. Randy stepped forward, and that's when it happened. He unholstered his weapon and pointed it straight at Jason. No warning. No cause. Just rage and embarrassment wrapped in a badge. Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, smiling like she'd just won a game she didn't understand.
And Jason?
He didn't move. Didn't flinch. Calm as stone. He just said, "This is all being recorded." Which it was 3 different angles. Our doorbell cam, Jason's own body cam, and a neighbor across the street, phone already aimed right at Randy. What Karen and Randy didn't know was that Jason had filed a restraining order request 2 days prior and was granted a temporary protective order that very morning. That meant Randy was in violation of a court order the moment he stepped onto our property. And by pointing a loaded firearm at a civilian, he just committed assault with a deadly weapon on video. Within the hour, real county deputies showed up at our door. They didn't come for Jason. They came for Randy. He was cuffed right there on our lawn. Karen screamed, tried to block the view, claimed Jason had set them up, but nobody believed her anymore. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some came outside and clapped. And Karen? Her clipboard slipped from her hand, hit the pavement, and stayed there. Jason picked it up, read the top page, and smiled. Because guess what? Karen had illegally signed off on her own monthly HOA paycheck, 3 times the amount legally allowed. We didn't even have to report it. The investigators would handle that part. The thing about Karen? She never thought she'd lose. People like her, clipboard tyrants in yoga pants, power-tripping through bylaws, don't plan for defeat. They plan for domination. For unchecked control. For ruling over plastic flamingos and patio furniture like suburban royalty. But as it turns out, even self-proclaimed HOA queens have to answer to the law.
And Jason?
Jason was done playing nice. After Randy was arrested, you'd think Karen might lay low, apologize, hide her surveillance signs, maybe do some soul-searching. Nope. She doubled down. Sent out a mass HOA newsletter titled Maintaining Order in Times of Disruption. She accused us of aggressive behavior, claimed Jason had staged a false flag incident, and even implied our unpatriotic actions were threatening community safety. Unpatriotic. She was accusing a Special Forces veteran who served 4 combat tours of unpatriotism. The woman had gall. I'll give her that. But that email, that glorious email, was her biggest mistake yet. Because she didn't just send it to the neighborhood. She CC'd the entire county board and Jason's lawyer. Yes, he has a lawyer now. Not just any lawyer, either a bulldog civil rights attorney who specializes in HOA overreach and unlawful surveillance. Turns out what Karen and her clipboard had been doing wasn't just annoying. It was illegal. Using community funds for unauthorized purchases? Illegal. Installing surveillance equipment aimed at private property without consent? Illegal. Falsifying board votes by manipulating proxies? Deeply illegal. Jason and the attorney compiled everything. The fake citations, the doctored budgets, the footage of Karen trespassing on other people's yards, the HOA rulebook she'd rewritten herself, complete with conflicting dates and forged digital timestamps. They even subpoenaed HOA financial records and discovered something truly golden. Karen had been paying herself a management stipend every month for 3 years. Total? Over $18,000. Unapproved. Unauthorized. Undeclared.
Boom.
When the county finally called a hearing, it was supposed to be closed door. But word got out. So many residents from Red Maple Grove showed up that they had to move it to the town library's auditorium. Folding chairs everywhere, people holding printouts of fines. One guy brought his dead gnome as evidence. Jason sat in the front row. Karen walked in wearing pearls, like she was on trial for tax evasion in a Netflix miniseries. She brought 2 manila folders. Zero remorse. But what she didn't bring? A lawyer. Because Karen still thought she could talk her way out of it. Big mistake. The room was silent when Jason stood.
He didn't yell.
Didn't get emotional. Just calmly laid out every violation, documentation, timestamps, visual evidence. He played a short video montage made from neighbor submissions. Randy shouting at residents, Karen ripping up someone's Halloween decorations at 2 a.m., an HOA meeting where she voted 3 times for herself using forged proxies.
People gasped.
One lady clutched her pearls. Karen started sweating. Then Jason handed the panel a folder titled Chronology of HOA Abuse, Red Maple Grove, 2020 to 2024. Inside, screenshots of threatening emails, audio recordings, the financial trail of misappropriated funds, even a whistleblower letter from a former HOA treasurer Karen had bullied out 2 years earlier. That was the final nail. The panel recessed for 40 minutes. When they returned, the lead investigator didn't sugarcoat it. Karen Mitchell, you are hereby removed from your position on the Red Maple Grove HOA board, effective immediately. Further investigation will be handled by the district attorney's office. Karen stood up. You can't do this to me. I built this community. The room erupted in applause. Someone yelled, you built it on lies. Someone else held up a sign that read, how free the bird feeders even Muffin. Okay, I made that last part up, but I like to think Muffin, her schnauzer, was on our side. Karen stormed out. Her clipboard fell off her arm on the way. She left it behind. Nobody gave it back. In the weeks that followed, things changed fast. A temporary board was appointed. Jason was asked to join, but he declined. Said he just wanted peace and bird watching. The neighborhood voted to revise all the bylaws, remove the ornamental restrictions, legalize normal-sized trucks, allow bird feeders, even reinstate decorative flamingos, no questions asked. A full audit was launched into the HOA finances. Charges were filed against Karen for embezzlement and fraud. Randy lost his badge, permanently. And us? We planted a second flagpole, one with the POW MIA banner, right next to the American flag. Karen tried to move to another neighborhood, but apparently the story followed her. She's currently renting a condo in a development with no HOA. Imagine that. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in Red Maple Grove, it came with a gavel, a court transcript, and a community newsletter titled Welcome Back, Sanity. After Karen's dramatic downfall at the HOA hearing, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd be wrong. Because like any true Karen, she wasn't going down without filing something. Yep, you guessed it, Karen's final act, the Great Defamation Lawsuit of 2024. Exactly 2 weeks after being removed from the HOA board, Karen filed a civil lawsuit against the entire neighborhood, claimed defamation of character, emotional distress, and, I kid you not, loss of future leadership opportunities. She demanded $250,000 in damages, said her reputation had been unfairly destroyed, that the videos shared online were edited to vilify her, that Jason had orchestrated a campaign to ruin her life. The case made it to the county court system. And once again, Jason showed up, not as a defendant, but as a witness for the community's legal team. Because this time, Karen wasn't up against one family. She was up against everyone. The trial lasted 4 days. Day 1. Karen's lawyer claimed she was the victim of an internet mob fueled by misinformation. Day 2. The HOA's lawyer, backed by over 30 residents, presented evidence, illegally signed checks, forged proxy ballots, unauthorized surveillance camera placement, misuse of HOA funds, including $600 spent on aesthetic compliance seminars that were actually spa days in Sedona.